Niall, and thank you, Sharon and Rory. That was amazing, and it'll be great to get more questions after at the end of the session. So it's my privilege to introduce our three institutional speakers this morning, and just to remind you again to add any questions into the chat, and we'll have a short question time at the end of the session. So our first speaker is Claire O'Brien. So while Claire is setting up her slides there, I'll just do a quick introduction. So Claire is a teaching librarian in UCC Library. She's part of a small team, currently a team of one, whose brief is to provide interdisciplinary classes and resources open to all of the UCC community. Claire's first professional post was as a schools librarian in Derry, and she's enjoyed a wide variety of roles over the intervening 33 years, including information officer with the Clean Technology Centre in RTC, in Cork RTC, which is now MTU, of course. Since joining UCC 27 years ago, she has mainly held teaching, learning and liaison roles across many disciplines of the university. So Claire, I can see your slides. Are you good to go?
I'm good, Julia. Can you hear me?
Okay, away with you, so thanks.
Thank you. And good morning, everybody. What I have here is a very brief overview of UCC Library's campus course, its development of its content and presentation, as well as its integration into the university's teaching programme to date. Canvas is UCC's DLE. So a couple of days before we went into lockdown last March, the Learning and Teaching team was given an open access Canvas course to use for library resources. And open access in this context means a course that's open to students to enroll, to self-enroll. So as we were running out the door, we made a start on our Library Learning Resources Canvas course by just putting up the class materials from our interdisciplinary classes, our slides, our links and our documents. So you can see there's no context beyond the title of the module, Library Literature Review. That was all we had to offer. Over the next few months, we worked on structuring the existing interdisciplinary classes for online delivery. The plan was to make them self-directed with live Q&As offered as follow-up support. We created videos for the live demos. We also added in prompts as the student went along for self-reflection, opportunities to try it yourself, and included some quizzes. To improve the overall look and design of the course, we created a home page and included navigation within the modules, and I'll show you what I mean by this soon. We were asked to provide content for the university's online orientation programme. So we created an orientation module for that. We also added in a module on referencing software, and most recently one on tracking influential papers and authors. My colleagues in Special Collections and Archives and Research Data Management created their own modules to include in the library course. As well as the content, we had to create a learning and teaching LibGuide to give information to staff and students on what was available and how to link to it and so on. We used LibCal to organise the Q&A bookings for any self-enrolled students. And if academics wanted to book a Q&A for their class, that was done through Microsoft Bookings. So by the time we got to September, this is what our campus course homepage looked like. There is text above this explaining about the course and the Q&As, but this is the more attractive part of the page. And just a glimpse inside a section, we have learning outcomes, we have some text, some sort of explanation or context as required. We have a video then for sort of the live demo version and a transcript of that video. And further down the page, any supporting materials, we tried to keep that to a minimum, just the most useful so as not to overburden the student further. And here at the bottom of the page is the navigation I mentioned earlier. Canvas only provides a previous and next button, so this was a big improvement. So moving on to how the interdisciplinary modules are used across the university. As I said earlier, we created a module for orientation, Introduction to UCC Library. which was included in the university's Canvas orientation programme. All students new to UCC were auto-enrolled in this. That's over 4,000 students. Then we have the Student Success Zone. This is a joint Canvas course from IT Services, Graduate Attributes, the Skills Centre and the Library. It aims to provide the key resources for students in a centralised Canvas space. We put our 3 foundational modules, the introduction to the library, finding library resources, and citing, referencing and plagiarism into this course, and signpost out to the full library course. And all UCC students are auto-enrolled in this. That's over 32,000. The full library course itself is linked from the library website and has about 160 students self-enrolled. And our liaison librarians also make use of the modules in their teaching. We then made the interdisciplinary modules available on Canvas Commons for academics to embed into their own modules. So I can keep an eye on the number of downloads made by lecturers into their own modules. You can see as of Monday, there were 109 downloads of the Finding Library Resources for Assignment module, 108 of the citing, referencing and plagiarism, and so on. The instructions to academics of how to download and direct links to the actual download of modules is provided in that LibGuide I mentioned earlier. This is a screenshot of the Student Success Zone. You can see that there's a tab for each of the contributors. Here's the libraries and here's our 3 modules, and a link out to the full. So what's next? We hope to include a video on the homepage and LibGuide, anywhere else we can think of, explaining the library course to students who might be unsure where to start or why it might be of use to them at all. We would like to include a chat function within Canvas for an immediate response to student queries rather than having to wait for a Q&A. We need to investigate analytics to get a better understanding of downloads and use. We're looking at providing a survey within Canvas to get feedback on the content from students, and we also need to survey academic staff for feedback on content and use. Finally, big thanks to everyone who helped get this together. My colleague in the Learning and Teaching team, Catherine Cahan, Stephanie Chen, for all her creative input for the videos, the homepage, her coding skills for the module navigation and input into the referencing software module. Paul Davison from Library IT, everybody needs a Paul in their lives, and Alan Carberry for his encouragement and advice. And thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Claire. It's excellent to see how individual institutions are responding and coping with the demand and how they're managing to reach out to their students. So while Róisín, I'm now going to introduce Róisín, and I'm delighted to introduce my own colleague from TU Dublin Library Services. So while Róisín is setting up her slides, I'll just do a quick introduction. Okay, so Róisín is, sorry, I was going to exit full screen there. So Róisín is an academic liaison librarian at TU Dublin. She's based in the College of Engineering and Built Environment. She manages the library's teaching and learning collection, and she provides research support to students and staff. A large part of her work involves digital literacy skills, teaching digital literacy skills to undergraduate and postgrad students. She's particularly interested in reflective practice and all things research, from theoretical perspectives to data analysis. She's an action researcher, constantly seeking improvement in teaching practice. So Róisín, I can see your slides there. Are you good to go?
I am indeed. I hope everybody can hear me, can they? Great. Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So these are based on my reflections of online teaching during the current public health crisis. So in the beginning, we had the flip to online learning. It was going to be a short, sharp shock, and it would all be back to normal in no time. We had a brave new world where old words like Zoom and Teams and Bongo took on new and significant meanings for us. We had new verbs like chunk, as in you can chunk that, or screencast, as in you could screencast that. We were meant to embrace the polls, the breakout rooms, whiteboards, engage students in the chat. So as my first post-lockdown online session rolled around, I was feeling really quite positive about my first class, because this was a group of postgrad students, and this was the final of 4 library-led sessions that I delivered over their studies. So I'd met the group before, so you're thinking, that'll be easy, no problem. I started with my usual chipper patter, what you see is what you get, and nothing. Not a smile, not a nod, no encouragement, hence the name of this presentation. I really did feel like I was speaking into the void. I think at one point I may have said, hello, is anybody there? I never realized how much I depended on body language and non-verbal feedback from a class when I'm in front of it. I do now. I couldn't identify where students were frowning, whether they're confused. I couldn't modify my language or change tack to help with any of that. Classroom management on that kind of friendly level was really gone. But not to be deterred, I was determined to make this success. So I decided to try pre-recording the session to improve student engagement, you know, thinking that students will feel less pressure because they'll have absorbed the content. They'll be able to come up with a few questions, maybe even submit questions in advance that I could talk about during the session. So I thought, well, you know, that sounds like a plan. No. That was just as silent as the first class. One student actually said that I'd gone to so much trouble with the video and the Q&A that they were really embarrassed not to have a question. So we all sat there and squirmed in the silence together, but apart in our various locations throughout the country. I needed a rapid rethink. I started identifying a number of issues, which I kind of divided into 2 broad categories, and they were what I can't control and what I can't always control. The first one was what I can't control is broadband, and I discovered these twin problems. They're very closely linked. One is not having access to broadband at all, or having access to very slow broadband. It's really, really difficult for students. I also discovered that students were watching their entire classes on their mobile phone. I mean, that's not sustainable in the short term. It's uncomfortable in the short term and not sustainable in the long term. So I opted for some mitigation. For broadband, the obvious thing is about recording your sessions. It's a gift that keeps on giving. Students get to play, pause and rewatch sections. It's just really great. Chunking is even better for people who have broadband issues because you're making it a digitally digestible piece, a shorter piece of information that has to be downloaded. Screencasting does the same, but it's a little bit more work for you in that we'll have to reshoot or do your video after the session. I also decided that I would explain to my students, be sure to let them know the kind of session they were going to have, particularly if I was switching between presentation and say live searching, because if somebody gets dropped out of a session and they come back in and all of a sudden your slides are gone, they're wondering, oh, what happened there? So let people know what's coming down the track. And the key thing, let them know what's going to happen in the case of an emergency, like they get kicked out, that it will be there for them, that you can contact, that they can contact you afterwards if they want. So having a plan for what goes wrong, because stuff does go wrong, was really important. The other twin factors and what I can't always control was time, and time impacts on student engagement. I had lecturers coming to me and saying, listen, can you squeeze everything in 45 minutes? You don't get any, there's no, no way they'll concentrate after that period of time. So that really does impact on your ability to engage with students. And of course, if students are reluctant in the face-to-face environment to ask questions, you can multiply that by a factor of 100 for the online area. So for mitigation, you've got no choice. You've got to review and refine and reduce what you're trying to teach. There's just no point in having 5 or 6 points or learning objectives. You can shelve that immediately. When you're trying to engage students, it really helps if you tell them at the beginning what you expect from them. So if it's just, there's going to be a poll, I'll expect you to have a go at this, or maybe post some stuff on the whiteboard. You need to say that. I found the chat a great informal space and actually really pushed it as an informal space. So I would say, listen, stick a word in the chat, put a topic in the chat. Don't worry about spelling, punctuation, just get your message across, and if the group isn't too big, you can offer the whole unmuting thing. It's great if you can have a colleague teach with you. They can keep an eye on the chat, and it really is helpful. Being flexible, and by that I mean if people do actually start asking you questions and you're not covering all your material, say a specific resource or a topic, do offer to actually do a little screencast and send that on to them later on. It's much better. Handing out your details, giving out contact details, you really, really need to do that. So my advice for surviving the void would be embrace what works for you. Think about what you're trying to teach. Think about the number of students you have in your group, and think about the time you have to deliver that message. You know, if you've got 80 students for 45 minutes, you're not doing breakout rooms, or you're only doing breakout rooms and you're not doing anything else. So think about, you know, that you can use chat, that polls and whiteboards are great. And that, of course, in that scenario with a large class, bringing in a colleague is really, really helpful. Offer follow-ups. They're brilliant for students who are isolated, and there are a lot of them out there. I noticed that when I compare last semester with the same semester last year, post-class follow-up was up by about 25%. So that really works. Peer support, I mean reaching out to your fellow colleagues, your teaching librarians, just for tips and strategies that work, for a bit of help. And of course, to remind you that you're not in on it on your own, and that everybody is going through the same stuff as you. There are huge opportunities for us here for the library. I mean, that whole piece about reaching students who aren't on the campus with us, who are working, who, you know, just can't get to the library class or whatever. And even for follow-ups, the fact that you can use Teams or Zoom to get people and do the reference interview, as it were, or research support, absolutely fantastic. So to finish up, I thought I'd take this meme from 2020, and thank you to Mercedes for tweeting this, because I just thought this was really kind of perfect. I'm not suggesting that I was ever an Edwardian lady on a three-wheel bike needing a push to get going, but I definitely needed a little bit of help from Ed Technology to find my feet and get going. And I'm not suggesting I'm a Mercedes concept car, although the car and me, we might share a few COVID curves at this point, but I would like to think that I'm on that continuum somewhere in the middle, that I'm no longer, you know, kind of speaking into the void, but more getting my voice across it. So that's me in a nutshell. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Róisín. That was excellent. I love those two final images of the lady on the bike and the cool car. That's brilliant. I think we can all empathize with your experiences, and some great advice there, and loads of comments and questions coming in there about how you manage. And Marta has just said it's such a relief to hear those experiences shared, and I think that's exactly it. It sums it up very nicely. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our last speaker before the coffee break. Last but not least is my colleague from the CONUL Teaching and Learning Committee, Áine Carey. So Áine, while you're setting up there, I'll just introduce you. Okay, so Áine is the Teaching and Research Development Librarian at Maynooth University Library, with responsibility for the Teaching and Research Development team. She's, sorry, I'll have to exit full screen there again. Áine has worked for over 20 years as a library and information professional in the academic and private sector. She's wide experience in teaching information literacy skills in different sectors, and is particularly interested in active learning techniques, threshold concepts, and teaching and learning technology. She's a treasurer of the CONUL Teaching and Learning Committee, and she's actively involved in organising seminars and professional development events around the library community. Áine, are you there?
I am here, just getting my timer
Good
ready.
woman.
To go.
Yeah, you're grand. Yeah, I have
Thanks.
you timed as well if you need it. So yeah,
I probably will, Julie. You know me.
No worries.
Thanks a million. I'll get going.
Great, so.
Thanks, Julie, for that, and good morning, everybody. And I've just loved the day so far. I have been trying to, as part of the CONUL Teaching and Learning Committee, being one of the people organising today, and just loved Sharon and Rory's talk, and my colleagues just now, Claire and Róisín, was excellent. And a good bit what I'm going to say, I think, is going to overlap with what is being said already, so maybe add a little bit to that. And I want to particularly talk about the engagement aspect of the online teaching experience that we've had recently. So in terms of very brief background, as Julie mentioned, I lead the Teaching and Research Development team in Maynooth University Library. As many of you will know, we moved to a functional model from a subject-based model of support some time ago, and it's something I've spoken quite a bit about at different conferences, as have my colleagues. So if you want to find out more about what we did, I've included at the end of my presentation my slide share link, and you can see some other presentations. But briefly, we kind of have, I suppose, 3 key functions. We identify that of teaching, research development, and academic liaison with our non-traditional students. And all of that is linked and at the core of academic engagement, where we promote out our services to the academic community, and we also invite their feedback to inform what we do in terms of developing our work. Regarding teaching, we normally adopt an activity-based model of teaching, so learning through doing in our designated library training rooms. So it's very much collaborative, it's interactive, we're moving around the room and getting student feedback on the exercise they're doing. So obviously that in itself was a challenge to make a transition to online teaching. But I want to specifically talk about for the next few minutes, and it really is only that, about what do we mean about engaging with students in classes and why it matters, how we, or at least how I did it. And going back to Sharon's point, which I think is really crucial for today and for the conversations we have, why is it important now, and what are the conversations we need to have as we move into preparing for a different future, which I think it's going to be. So just like Róisín very effectively captured, I think we've all been here in that black screen of doom, as Róisín said, that looking and talking into the void. To touch again on something Sharon said, I was teaching online within 4 days of moving off-site. But a lot of my teaching from March to September was with postgraduate students or the research community, or students, which we have many of in Maynooth, which aren't part of the formal academic programme. And while we don't have time to talk about here, I would say that this online format, they embraced it, and there was a lot of engagement actually. So I didn't really start seeing that kind of horrific "is anyone out there" moment till maybe I encountered more of the undergraduate students, which came in massive numbers from September onwards. I want to share this because I know already I'll run out of time to cover everything. But one of the things that I did, I've always used Mentimeter at the start of my sessions to ask students for their expectations and to check their prior learning so that I can tailor the session at the very beginning. And I think probably as a result of saying, "How are you doing?" and getting absolutely no response, I started by asking it through Mentimeter. This is a screen capture from yesterday, and the word "overwhelmed" sticks out in the middle there. That, bar one class where everyone was absolutely great, that's one word that everybody used every time I asked it. Indeed, I think we all would ourselves. But there are positive voices here. I think at the moment there are less of those because people are really struggling. You see that people are optimistic to learn and they're finding it enjoyable, and there was a mix of those too. And then the tiny little voices, you see the word "lost" appearing overwhelmed, and maybe I'm a bit too emotive about it, but it really struck me when I read things like thinking of dropping out, can't take this anymore. And one of the first things I did at this point was it allowed me to have a conversation where, first of all, I could just empathize and let students know they were heard and they weren't alone in it. But also in my classes, usually the academic is there in the room, and we were able to collaboratively discuss practical measures that they in the department, that me and the library services and the university in general could practically support them. And I found that absolutely invaluable for just opening up a connection with the students. I'm going to put all of these up together. Time is just ticking away so quickly. So in general terms, engagement is so important in the classroom because we need to set up at the outset a sense of trust in ourselves and authenticity. I mean, who are we and why should the students believe in us? We need some way to create a rapport with them so that we just achieve that connection and set expectations for the students and ourselves about what we'll cover, and boundaries for what they're expected and not expected to do. And finally, I think we forget that when this works well, we're empowered as an instructor, and hopefully we've also had that lovely experience of leaving a class feeling, yeah, I got that, I created something there. In normal times, a lot of this happens just without thinking through normal social interaction, eye contact, they physically see us. And we all know what it's like at the moment with social distancing, mask wearing, and having not to see people, that we literally miss that element of communication. So what we needed to really work on in an online way is what are the small little steps, and Róisín very effectively captured some of them, that we can recreate that connection when we're online. So here's what I tried. So I mentioned Menti already, and I call these interactions low risk. And I mean by that even though we think the chat function is excellent, and it is, at the outset, it's still putting students on the spot and making them feel, who's looking at what I'm going to say? So at the beginning, I had anonymized tools like the ones I mentioned. And what I found absolutely key was letting students know what was coming next. I think Róisín mentioned that as well. So at the beginning, when I'm blathering on a little bit, I tell them as I'm introducing the event that I'm going to be asking for their input. So they always know ahead of time that they're expected to input. This might be a bit controversial, and it depends on your personality and what you're comfortable with, but I did feel comfortable sharing my experience, the kids in the background, how I was feeling at a particular day. And I did think it was important to say to students that I was hearing their anxiety and their concerns, and I was going to help in what way I could. Briefly, as we move through it, like Róisín, you don't have time to be doing the high-tech stuff, and you might not need to, particularly for librarians when we're often meeting students once. I do co-deliver some modules, and in those cases I made more use of breakout rooms. But I learned to use chat effectively, ask simple questions where they could give me quick yes and no, or use emojis. I learned that if I was doing an exercise, it was fine to get them to carry out an exercise off screen, give them a time limit, let them know that they would need to share. And then I would just mute myself, stay on screen, but do something for 5 to 7 minutes. And that brings me to the last point I've mentioned a few times in my talks recently, just to sit with the silence. So we all know that silence in any teaching environment is uncomfortable. It's even more so when you're having it online and there's just this radio silence. Is anybody there? But it's effective because, first of all, it puts the onus back on the students to, if you don't do something. So if I want them to complete a Menti poll, if I'm waiting for an answer in chat, if I just say, I'm just going to give that another little minute or so, and maybe it's just 30 more seconds, but you don't speak for that time, you'll often find the engagement. Somebody will say something and that'll kickstart it. And the other point about it is that I'm someone who talks a lot, and I had to learn, I can see I'm just finishing up at 8 minutes, so I have one more slide after this. I had to learn that if I was asking them a question, I needed to give the students a bit of time to think about what they wanted to say and time to type it up. And I got loads of those invaluable tips from Sharon and the IUA Dig Ed events, which were just fantastic in this period. So the positive thoughts about this, and again, I'll just have to put this very quickly, I know, so let me just put them all up together. So this is where I want to leave us in terms of looking ahead. I think that the online environment has allowed the process of teaching to be a bit more democratic, even physically. We're all just a box on the screen. And right now we're all navigating our working from home challenges and whatever they might be. In a normal classroom situation, there is still, no matter how much you try to alleviate, a hierarchy of standing at the top of the room and having students around you. I also really like what Sharon said about the flexibility. I've so much to say in this, which I can't do now, but I too have come across a whole variety of students for whom the online process is enhancing their learning. And I am now, along with my team, looking at ways we can retain this in what I think is going to be a future hybrid environment. Also, I have found, even in little, maybe inconsequential ways, there is enhanced engagement online. Students like my posts and chat with the heart emoji. They say thanks at the end. I know these are small things, but sometimes I would have had classes where I saw the eyes cast down and students who felt uncomfortable, even speaking up, didn't do so at all. And the final point is, I think the online environment, due to the great technological opportunities that are coming out for us, give us meaningful opportunities to share and collaborate with our student participants. And we've seen that no more so than in today's event, with Rory joining so successfully with Sharon and our student interns coming up. So my apologies, Julie, for going a little bit over the 8 minutes there. My contact details are here. Including my Twitter handle and email, and I'd be delighted to hear. Lots of people came back to me after a talk I gave on the 20th of January recently, and there's a lot of information about what we did on teaching there, and those slides and others are available on that link that I provided there. So I'll stop sharing and hand back to Julie, and many thanks.
That's brilliant, Áine. Thank you so much. And I really agree with you about the whole democratization of education there through the online format. There's loads of comments coming in for all three speakers, everybody agreeing and just saying a few things there about the sound of silence, embracing silence, you know, and just giving students time to kind of process what they're hearing, you know, and a lot of people say that's why they don't take part, because they're actually processing what they're hearing, and then they might come back to you with questions after the session. So I found that a lot in my own teaching. So yeah, so silence and loads of things about silence. We're a bit short on time, but I have just one question. It's kind of a theme question that's been coming up again and again in various ways. And Marta phrased this as enhanced learning, and other people call it blended learning. So either Claire or Róisín or Áine or all three of you might like to just very quickly say, do you think the future is for library T&L, is it enhanced learning over the next year or two? Any comments or opinions? I see heads nodding already.
There are too many, there are downsides because it was kind of pushed on us, but now that we've kind of found our feet a wee bit, the opportunities are there in front of us, you know, reaching out to students that we couldn't, who are time poor or not in our location, the ability to make our you know, to even the screencasting, little things, blended is the way to go. There are some things that I will do no matter what. And I have to say, I have learned a lot about engagement because I was forced to do it online. So yeah, there are opportunities and definitely blended is the way to go. Brilliant. Okay, thanks. Áine or Claire, do you want to add to that? Or
I just very quickly want to say that two things I think that Alan Carberry mentioned in a tweet earlier. This has disrupted what we've been doing, and as Sharon said, we'd never have done it this way if we'd planned it, but I have found it has been very invigorating. So I think it's forced us all to look at things very differently, second of all. And then the other thing is, this is an opportunity, certainly in my institution, I'm sure in others, we were having a real difficulty reaching as many students as we wanted. We were limited by physical space and numbers and the material and the time. And online is absolutely one solution to that. Not that face-to-face will ever go, I think, either.
Okay, that's perfect. I think, yeah, we need the face-to-face as well, but it's good to have the online. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. And it all kind of feeds back into Áine's last point there about the democratization of education and teaching and learning, whether it's libraries or in the wider sphere. So that is all brilliant. Thank you so much, you guys. Really appreciate it. We've learned so much, and also the empathy coming from you guys is just great for all of us. You know, we all feel we're not alone. We're not in our own little sometimes traumatized bubble. So what I'm going to do now is we're 5 minutes behind time, so I'm going to move it to coffee, if that's okay. So before you all disappear for your coffee break, just to mention, the Padlets will still be open. If you'd like to add to the Padlets during the coffee break, please do that. There will also be optional breakout rooms. So if you'd like to stay and chat to friends and colleagues, please stay in your breakout room.